The sting of rejection echoed through the sacred circle like a blade, leaving her humiliated before the entire pack during the ceremony meant to be the most beautiful night of her life. 3 days of shame and isolation passed until a knock at the door changed everything. On the other side stood a woman claiming to be her aunt, carrying secrets about her lineage that she herself had never known. Evelyn's tears mixed with the ceremonial smoke as every eye in the sacred circle turned toward her with pity, and in that moment of absolute humiliation, she realized her entire life had been a lie. The drums that had been beating steadily throughout the full moon ceremony now seemed to mock her with their relentless rhythm, each beat hammering home the rejection that would echo through her soul for months to come. The scent of burning sage and juniper that should have blessed this night instead carried the bitter taste of her shattered dreams. Marcus stood before the gathered community, his broad shoulders rigid with determination, as he spoke the words that would forever change her fate. "I cannot accept this bond," he declared, his voice cutting through the autumn night air like a blade through silk. "My heart belongs to another, and I will not dishonor the sacred traditions by pretending otherwise." His eyes, once warm when they looked upon her, now avoided her gaze entirely, as if the sight of her pain was too much to bear. The circle of witnesses, comprised of families who had watched Evelyn grow from a shy child into the woman she had become, maintained their respectful silence, but she could feel their sympathy like a suffocating blanket. The elderly women clicked their tongues softly, remembering their own youth and the fragility of young hearts. The men shifted uncomfortably, knowing that rejection during the bonding ceremony was rare and considered deeply inauspicious for the entire community. Elder Miriam, the ceremony's officiant, raised her gnarled hands to restore order as murmurs began to ripple through the crowd. Her weathered face, marked by decades of guiding such rituals, showed genuine sorrow as she looked upon Evelyn. "The spirits have spoken through Marcus," she announced, though her voice lacked its usual conviction. "We must respect the will of the heart, even when it brings pain to those we cherish." Evelyn felt her knees weaken as the full weight of public rejection crashed over her like a winter storm. The white ceremonial dress her mother had sewn with such loving care now felt like a mockery, its intricate embroidery catching the firelight and making her feel like a decorated sacrifice. She had dreamed of this night for years, imagining how Marcus would take her hands and speak the ancient words that would bind them before their community. Instead, she stood alone in the center of the sacred circle, abandoned and exposed. The forest around them seemed to hold its breath, the usual nighttime sounds of owls and rustling leaves falling silent, as if nature itself was shocked by the unprecedented turn of events. The towering pine trees that formed a natural cathedral around their gathering place cast long shadows in the flickering torchlight, creating an atmosphere that felt more like a funeral than a celebration. As Evelyn fought to maintain her composure, her mind raced back through the months leading to this moment. She had been so certain of Marcus's feelings, so confident in the signs she thought she had seen, the way he smiled at her during harvest festivals, the gentle touch of his hand when he helped her carry water from the mountain spring, the stolen moments of conversation after the evening prayers. Had she imagined it all? Had she been such a fool as to mistake kindness for love? The humiliation burned deeper than any physical pain she had ever experienced. This was not just personal rejection, it was public disgrace in front of everyone she had ever known and respected. Her parents, standing among the gathered families, looked as devastated as she felt. Her father's weathered hands clenched into fists at his sides, while her mother's face had gone pale as moonlight, tears streaming down her cheeks in a mirror of Evelyn's own anguish. But as the ceremony continued without her, as Marcus was led away to begin the rituals that would bind him to another, Evelyn felt something unexpected stirring beneath her heartbreak. A spark of defiance, small but growing stronger with each passing moment. She had always been told she was not meant for great things, that her humble origins and gentle nature suited her for a quiet life of service to others. Yet standing in this circle of judgment, feeling the weight of communal pity pressing down upon her, she began to question everything she had been taught about her place in the world. The other woman, Lydia, emerged from the shadows at the circle's edge, like a vision from a dream. Her golden hair caught the torchlight as she moved with confident grace toward Marcus, her emerald ceremonial dress flowing around her like liquid fire. She was everything Evelyn was not. Bold where Evelyn was cautious, wealthy where Evelyn was poor, connected to the powerful families that governed their community where Evelyn remained among the working class. As Marcus took Lydia's hands and began to speak the binding words that should have been Evelyn's, something inside her chest cracked open. Not just her heart, though that was surely broken, but something deeper. A door she had never known existed, leading to chambers of her soul that had remained locked since birth. The pain of rejection was transforming into something else entirely, something that felt almost like power. The autumn wind picked up suddenly, swirling the ceremonial smoke into spirals that danced around Evelyn's still form. Several of the elders exchanged meaningful glances, recognizing omens in the natural world that the younger generation might miss. The flames of the sacred fire flickered and bent, as if responding to some invisible force, and more than one witness later swore they saw strange lights playing around Evelyn's silhouette. But in that moment, consumed by her anguish, Evelyn noticed none of the supernatural signs that her grief was awakening. She only knew that her world had ended, that everything she had believed about her future had been destroyed in a single night. The dreams she had cherished of building a home with Marcus, of raising children who would play in the same forests where she had grown up, of growing old together while watching the seasons change over their beloved mountains, all of it reduced to ash and smoke. When the ceremony finally concluded and the community began to disperse, offering her awkward condolences and pitying smiles, Evelyn found herself alone in the sacred circle. The torches were burning low, casting dancing shadows that seemed to reach for her with ghostly fingers. The scent of extinguished fires and cooling earth filled her nostrils as she finally allowed herself to collapse to her knees on the soft forest floor. She wept then as she had never wept before, great heaving sobs that seemed to come from the very depths of her being. The sound echoed off the surrounding trees, creating a chorus of grief that spoke to something primal in the wilderness around her. Animals that should have fled from human emotion instead drew closer, as if her pain called to something wild and ancient in their own hearts. Hours passed before Evelyn finally found the strength to rise and make her way home through the darkened forest paths. Her parents' cottage sat at the edge of the settlement, modest but well-tended, with herb gardens that her mother had carefully cultivated and woodwork that showcased her father's skill. It had always felt like a sanctuary to her, but tonight it seemed impossibly small and confining. Her parents were waiting, of course, sitting by the dying embers of their hearth with worry etched deep in their faces. Her mother, Eleanor, rose immediately and gathered Evelyn into her arms without speaking, understanding that no words could ease this kind of pain. Her father, Thomas, remained seated, but his eyes were bright with unshed tears and barely controlled anger at the young man who had humiliated his daughter so publicly. "I don't understand," Evelyn whispered against her mother's shoulder, breathing in the familiar scents of lavender and wood smoke that always clung to Elena's clothing. "I was so sure he cared for me. How could I have been so wrong about everything?" Eleanor stroked her daughter's dark hair, the same rich brown that had come from generations of mountain women who had known their own share of heartbreak. "Sometimes the spirits have plans we cannot see," she said softly, though her voice carried doubt about the wisdom of those same spirits. "Perhaps this pain serves a purpose we do not yet understand." Thomas finally spoke, his voice rough with emotion. "That boy is a fool," he declared, though they all knew that Marcus was hardly a boy at 25 and that his choice, however painful, was his right to make. Any man who cannot see your worth doesn't deserve to share your life. But even as her parents offered comfort and support, Evelyn felt the vast emptiness of her future stretching before her. In their close-knit community, being rejected during the bonding ceremony carried a stigma that might follow her for years. Other eligible men would wonder what was wrong with her, why Marcus had found her lacking. She might never have another chance at the kind of love and partnership she had always dreamed of finding. The next morning dawned grey and drizzling, as if the sky itself mourned her loss. Evelyn forced herself to go about her usual routines, helping her mother with the household tasks and tending to the vegetable garden that would see them through the coming winter. But everything felt different now, viewed through the lens of her altered circumstances. The other women of the settlement, who had always treated her as an equal, now spoke to her with careful gentleness, the way one might address someone recovering from a serious illness. 3 days passed in this haze of grief and adjustment before the knock came at their cottage door. Evelyn was kneading bread dough, finding some small comfort in the familiar rhythm of the work when the sound echoed through their small home. Her father answered, and his sharp intake of breath told her immediately that this was no ordinary visitor. "Lady Isadora," Thomas said, his voice filled with the awe and respect that the community's supreme leader commanded from all who knew her. "We are honored by your presence." Evelyn's hands stilled in the dough as she heard that name. Lady Isadora Blackthorne was a figure of legend as much as reality, a woman who had guided their community for over 3 decades with wisdom that seemed to come from sources beyond ordinary human understanding. She rarely visited individual homes, conducting her business from the great hall that stood at the center of their settlement. For her to come here, to their humble cottage, was unprecedented. "I have come to speak with Evelyn," Lady Isadora said, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. "Is she at home?" Evelyn's mother appeared at her side, wiping flour from her hands on her apron with nervous movements. "Of course, my lady." "Evelyn, wash your hands and come quickly." But as Evelyn approached the doorway where Lady Isadora waited, she felt something she had never experienced before in the older woman's presence. Power. Not the political authority that everyone acknowledged, but something deeper and more elemental. Something that seemed to recognize and respond to the changes that had occurred within Evelyn during the ceremony 3 nights ago. Lady Isadora was a striking woman, tall and elegant despite being well into her 50s, with silver hair that she wore in intricate braids, adorned with small charms and trinkets that caught the light as she moved. Her eyes, a startling violet shade that was rumored to be a mark of her supernatural gifts, seemed to look right through Evelyn to something hidden deep inside. "Walk with me," Lady Isadora commanded gently, extending her hand in a gesture that was both invitation and order. "We have much to discuss." As Evelyn took that offered hand, she felt a shock of connection that ran through her entire body like lightning. In that instant, she knew with absolute certainty that her life was about to change again, but this time in ways she could never have imagined. The humiliation of 3 nights ago had been only the beginning of a journey she was not yet prepared to understand. But what happened during that walk through the misty morning forest would change everything she thought she knew about herself, her community, and her destiny. The mist swirled around them as they walked deeper into the ancient forest, and with each step away from the cottage, Evelyn felt the weight of her old life lifting from her shoulders like chains finally breaking free. Lady Isadora moved with purpose through paths that seemed to appear before them and vanish behind, as if the forest itself was reshaping reality to accommodate their passage. The silence between them was not uncomfortable, but charged with anticipation, like the air before a thunderstorm. "Tell me what you felt during the ceremony," Lady Isadora said without preamble, her violet eyes fixed on the path ahead. Not what you thought, not what others saw, but what you felt in the deepest part of your being when Marcus spoke those words of rejection. Evelyn hesitated, unsure how to articulate the strange sensations that had accompanied her heartbreak. It was like something inside me was breaking open, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Not just my heart, but something I didn't even know existed, like a door had been locked all my life and suddenly the key turned. Lady Isadora nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. The awakening, she murmured, more to herself than to Evelyn. It happened exactly as the prophecy foretold, though I had hoped it might come to you more gently. Prophecy? Evelyn stopped walking, her pulse quickening. What prophecy? But Lady Isadora continued forward, forcing Evelyn to hurry to catch up as they emerged into a clearing she had never seen before, despite having explored these forests since childhood. In the center stood a circle of standing stones, each one carved with symbols that seemed to shift and dance in the corner of her vision. The mist here was thicker, almost luminescent, and the very air hummed with energy that made her skin tingle. "Sit!" Lady Isadora commanded, gesturing to a flat stone that had been worn smooth by countless years of wind and rain. What I am about to tell you will challenge everything you believe about yourself, your family, and your place in this world. Evelyn obeyed, her hands trembling as she settled onto the cold stone. The forest around them had fallen completely silent, as if every creature was holding its breath to listen to what would be revealed in this sacred space. Lady Isadora began to pace around the circle, her fingers trailing along the carved stones as she spoke. 18 years ago, on the night of your birth, I received a vision. I saw a child born under the dark moon, marked by rejection and shaped by pain, who would rise to become the bridge between our world and the ancient powers that once governed these lands. The words sent a chill down Evelyn's spine that had nothing to do with the autumn air. You're talking about me? The vision showed me a young woman standing in a ceremonial circle, tears on her face and betrayal in her heart, but around her the very elements themselves would respond to her anguish. I saw power awakening in her that had lain dormant for generations, waiting for the right moment, the right catalyst. Lady Isadora stopped pacing and fixed those unsettling violet eyes on Evelyn. I saw you, child, though I did not know your face then. Evelyn shook her head, unable to process what she was hearing. That's impossible. I'm nobody special. I'm just a carpenter's daughter who couldn't even hold on to the man she thought loved her. Are you? Lady Isadora's voice carried a hint of amusement. Then explain to me why the ceremonial fires bent toward you that night. Why the wind rose when your heart broke. Why 3 of our most sensitive elders reported feeling a surge of power unlike anything they had experienced in decades. The memories came flooding back then, details Evelyn had dismissed in her grief. The way the flames had flickered strangely, the sudden gusts of wind that had seemed to come from nowhere, the odd sensation that something inside her was responding to forces beyond her understanding. She had attributed it all to her emotional state. But now, I watched you grow, Lady Isadora continued, settling onto a stone across from Evelyn. I saw the signs in your compassion for wounded animals, the way plants seemed to thrive under your touch, the uncanny ability you had to sense when someone was troubled or in need. Your parents attributed it to a kind heart, but I recognized it for what it truly was, the awakening gifts of someone born to bridge 2 worlds. What 2 worlds? Evelyn's voice cracked with the weight of questions she was afraid to ask. Lady Isadora was quiet for so long that Evelyn began to wonder if she would answer at all. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of centuries. Our community exists at the crossing point between the mortal realm and the domain of the Fey courts. For generations, my family has served as guardians of that balance, ensuring that neither world overwhelms the other. But the old bloodlines are weakening, and I have no heir to carry on this sacred duty. The implication hit Evelyn like a physical blow. You think I'm supposed to replace you? Not replace, Lady Isadora corrected gently. Transform. The prophecy speaks of one who will not merely maintain the balance, but reshape it entirely, creating new bonds between our peoples that will strengthen both realms. Evelyn stood abruptly, pacing to the edge of the stone circle as panic began to claw at her throat. This is insane. 3 days ago, I was planning my bonding ceremony with a man I thought I loved. Now you're telling me I'm some sort of prophesied bridge between worlds. I can't even manage my own life, let alone mystical responsibilities I don't understand. The awakening is never easy, Lady Isadora said with infinite patience, but it was your very humanity, your capacity for love and loss, that made you suitable for this role. The Fae respect power, but they revere emotional truth. Your pain, your rejection, your ability to survive heartbreak and emerge stronger, these are not weaknesses, Evelyn. They are the foundations of your strength. As if summoned by her words, a figure stepped out from behind one of the standing stones. Evelyn gasped, her hand flying to her throat as she took in the otherworldly beauty of the newcomer. He was tall and lean, with features that seemed carved from marble and moonlight. His hair was silver white despite his apparent youth, and his eyes were the deep green of forest pools. When he moved, it was with a grace that spoke of predatory power held carefully in check. Lady Isadora, he said, his voice carrying an accent that belonged to no human tongue Evelyn had ever heard. You have brought her at last. Lord Kieran. Lady Isadora inclined her head respectfully. May I present Evelyn, the one foretold in the ancient prophecies? Evelyn found herself unable to speak, caught between terror and fascination as Lord Kieran approached. Everything about him screamed danger, from the way shadows seemed to bend around him to the predatory gleam in those inhuman eyes. Yet she felt no urge to flee, only a strange sense of recognition, as if some part of her had been waiting her entire life for this moment. She is younger than I expected, Lord Kieran said, circling Evelyn slowly, like a hunter evaluating prey. And her power feels raw, untrained. Are you certain she is the one? Test her, Lady Isadora suggested, though there was warning in her tone. But gently, my lord. She has only just begun to awaken. Lord Kieran stopped directly in front of Evelyn, close enough that she could smell the otherworldly scent of him, like winter forests and starlight, and something indefinably wild. Give me your hand, he commanded softly. Every instinct screamed at her to refuse, but Evelyn found herself extending her palm toward him without conscious thought. The moment his fingers touched hers, the world exploded into sensation. She saw flashes of impossible beauty, silver cities that existed in the spaces between dreams, courts where music could kill or heal, beings of such ethereal loveliness that looking upon them was both agony and ecstasy. But beneath the beauty, she sensed something else, loneliness. A profound isolation that made her own recent heartbreak seem trivial by comparison. Lord Kieran was ancient, powerful beyond measure, but he was also alone in ways that no mortal could truly understand. When the vision ended, and she found herself back in the stone circle, she was surprised to find tears on her cheeks. But they were not tears of fear or overwhelming sensation. They were tears of empathy for the beautiful, terrible creature before her. Lord Kieran had gone completely still, his green eyes wide with something that might have been shock. Impossible, he breathed. She actually saw. What did she see? Lady Isadora asked urgently. The truth, Lord Kieran replied, his gaze never leaving Evelyn's face. Behind all the glamour and power, she saw the truth of what we are. No human has ever... He trailed off, seeming genuinely shaken. Evelyn found her voice at last. You're lonely, she said simply. All that power, All that beauty, but you're so alone, it's like a physical ache inside you. Lord Kieran actually stepped backward, as if her words had struck him. For a moment, his perfect composure cracked, and she glimpsed something vulnerable and very nearly human beneath the supernatural exterior. "She is indeed the one," he said finally, his voice carefully controlled once more. "The bridge builder, the one who sees past illusion to essence. The old prophecies spoke truly." Lady Isadora smiled, and for the first time since the disastrous ceremony, Evelyn saw genuine hope in someone's eyes. "Then you will support her claim when the time comes?" "I will consider it," Lord Kieran replied carefully. "But first she must prove herself capable of the role. Raw power is not enough. She must learn to wield it with wisdom and restraint." "What kind of proof?" Evelyn asked, though she wasn't entirely sure she wanted to know the answer. Lord Kieran's smile was sharp as a blade. "The courts will test you, little bridge builder. They will try to break your mind with illusions, seduce your heart with promises of power, and challenge your will with tasks that would destroy lesser mortals. If you survive, if you can hold on to your essential humanity while mastering gifts that could remake reality itself, then perhaps you are worthy of the role destiny has assigned you." The magnitude of what was being asked of her crashed over Evelyn like a tidal wave. A week ago, her greatest concern had been whether Marcus would choose wildflowers or cultivated roses for their bonding ceremony. Now she was being told she was prophesied to serve as some sort of supernatural diplomat between worlds she had never known existed. "I need time to think," she said, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. "This is all happening too fast." "Time is a luxury we may not have," Lady Isadora warned. "The barriers between our worlds are weakening faster than we anticipated. Without a proper bridgekeeper in place soon, the consequences could be catastrophic for both realms." But Lord Kieran held up a hand. "No," he said firmly. "She is right to ask for time. Wisdom lies in considering one's choices carefully, not in rushing toward destiny blindly." His strange green eyes softened slightly as they met Evelyn's. "Take your time, bridge builder. When you are ready to begin your training, the forest will show you the way back to this place." With that, he simply vanished, leaving behind only the faint scent of winter and starlight. Evelyn stared at the spot where he had stood, wondering if any of this could possibly be real. "Come," Lady Isadora said gently, rising from her stone seat. "I will walk you home. You have much to consider, and your parents will be worried." As they made their way back through the mist-shrouded forest, Evelyn's mind raced with everything she had learned. The path seemed shorter on the return journey, and soon she could see the familiar smoke rising from her family's chimney. "One more thing," Lady Isadora said as they reached the edge of the cottage garden. "Marcus's rejection was not entirely his own choice. There are those in our community who fear change, who would prefer to keep the old ways intact rather than risk the transformation that your awakening represents." Evelyn stopped walking, her heart clenching with a mixture of hope and fresh pain. "Someone made him reject me. Councilwoman Vera has significant influence over the young men of our settlement," Lady Isadora said carefully. "She has her own ideas about who should hold power and how our community should be governed. Your potential threatens those plans." The revelation hit Evelyn like a physical blow. Her rejection hadn't even been real. It had been orchestrated by someone who saw her as a threat to their own ambitions. The humiliation burned even deeper now, knowing that her pain had been manufactured as a tool in someone else's political game. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. "Because when you begin your training, when word spreads of what you truly are, Councilwoman Vera will move against you more directly. You need to be prepared for that battle, as well as the supernatural challenges ahead." As Lady Isadora disappeared back into the forest mist, Evelyn stood in her mother's garden, surrounded by the simple, familiar scents of herbs and vegetables, and tried to reconcile the two realities now competing in her mind. In one, she was still the heartbroken daughter of a carpenter, struggling to rebuild her life after public rejection. In the other, she was a prophesied bridge between worlds, destined for power and responsibility beyond imagining. But as she looked up at the star-filled sky, feeling the strange new awareness thrumming beneath her skin like a second heartbeat, she began to suspect that the choice between those realities had already been made for her long before she was born. The only question now was whether she was brave enough to embrace what she was becoming, or if she would spend the rest of her life running from a destiny that would find her regardless of how far she tried to hide. 2 weeks passed in a haze of decision and indecision before Evelyn finally found the courage to return to the stone circle. The autumn had deepened around their settlement, painting the forest in brilliant shades of gold and crimson that seemed to mirror the fire now burning constantly beneath her skin. Every day that passed brought new manifestations of whatever was awakening within her. Flowers bloomed at her touch despite the cooling weather. Animals approached her without fear, and more than once she had caught her reflection showing eyes that glowed with an inner light she couldn't explain. The path to the sacred grove revealed itself as Lord Kieran had promised, materializing under her feet as if the forest itself was guiding her steps. But when she emerged into the clearing, it was not Lady Isadora or the otherworldly Fey Lord who waited for her. Instead, a figure sat on the central stone that made her heart skip with a mixture of longing and fury. Marcus turned at the sound of her approach, his familiar face haggard with sleepless nights and regret. The strong jaw she had once dreamed of kissing was covered with stubble, and his usually bright eyes were shadowed with something that looked like shame. He rose slowly, as if the weight of what he had done was a physical burden dragging at his limbs. "Evelyn," he said, her name falling from his lips like a prayer or a curse. "I hoped I would find you here. What do you want, Marcus?" Her voice was steadier than she felt, but she could hear the new undertone of power that had been growing stronger each day. Something in that sound made him step backward, his eyes widening with recognition that she was no longer the same woman he had rejected. "To apologize," he said, his voice breaking. "To explain. To beg your forgiveness if you'll let me." The laugh that escaped her throat held no humor. "Forgiveness? For humiliating me in front of our entire community? For making me believe you cared when it was all an elaborate performance designed to break me?" Marcus flinched as if she had struck him. "It wasn't like that. I did care. I do care. More than you know." "Then why?" The question tore from her throat with all the anguish of the past weeks. "Why did you choose her? Why did you make me stand there and watch you bind yourself to someone else when you knew how I felt about you?" For a long moment, Marcus was silent, his hands clenching and unclenching at his sides as he struggled with words that seemed too heavy to speak. When he finally answered, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Because Councilwoman Vera told me what you really are." The words hit her like a physical blow. "What I am? She said you're dangerous, that there's something unnatural about you, something that could bring disaster to our community if it's allowed to grow unchecked. She showed me things, Evelyn, strange incidents from your childhood that I had dismissed as coincidence, the way animals follow you, how plants grow stronger where you've walked, the way you always seem to know when someone is hurt or in trouble before anyone tells you." Evelyn felt the power beneath her skin surge in response to her emotions, and the standing stones around them began to glow with a faint inner light. Marcus's eyes widened with fear and something that might have been awe. "She said the only way to contain what you're becoming was to break your spirit," he continued, his voice gaining strength as the truth poured out of him. "That if I rejected you publicly, humiliated you completely, it might stop whatever is awakening inside you from fully manifesting. She convinced me that choosing Lydia was a sacrifice I had to make to save everyone I care about, including you." The betrayal cut deeper than any blade. Not only had her rejection been orchestrated, but it had been designed specifically to wound her so profoundly that it would cripple her emerging gifts. The calculated cruelty of it took her breath away. "And did you think it worked?" she asked, her voice deadly quiet as power continued to build around them. "Did you think breaking my heart would make me less than what I am?" Marcus stared at her, taking in the way the very air seemed to shimmer around her form, the way her dark hair moved as if stirred by invisible winds. "No," he said finally. "I think it made you magnificent." Before she could respond to that unexpected declaration, another voice cut through the charged atmosphere of the grove. "How touching. The puppet finally understands the strings that moved him." Councilwoman Vera emerged from the shadows between the stones, her silver hair perfectly arranged, despite having apparently walked through the forest, her pale blue eyes cold with calculated malice. She was a handsome woman in her 50s, with the kind of sharp beauty that came from years of wielding influence and getting her own way. But now, faced with what Evelyn was becoming, there was fear beneath that careful composure. "Councilwoman," Evelyn said, her tone formal despite the rage burning in her chest, "come to gloat over your successful manipulation." "Come to finish what should have been completed weeks ago," Vera replied, raising her hands to reveal symbols carved into her palms, old marks that spoke of binding magic and suppression. "The ancient ways exist for good reason, child. Some powers are too dangerous to be unleashed, no matter what prophecies might say." The attack came without further warning. Vera spoke words in a language that predated their settlement by centuries, and Evelyn felt invisible chains wrapping around her spirit, trying to lock away the gifts that had been growing stronger each day. The pain was excruciating, like having part of her soul torn away, and she fell to her knees with a cry that echoed off the standing stones. But something unexpected happened. Instead of submitting to the binding, the power inside her roared to life with protective fury. The stone circle blazed with golden light, and a wind rose from nowhere that sent Vera stumbling backward. The ancient symbols on the councilwoman's palms began to smoke and burn, and her confident expression transformed into one of shocked terror. "Impossible," she gasped, clutching her wounded hands to her chest. "The binding should have held. Nothing that young should be able to resist. She is not yours to bind." Lord Kieran's voice cut through the chaos like a blade through silk, and suddenly he stood between Evelyn and her attacker, his otherworldly beauty now terrible in its fury. Power radiated from him in waves that made the very air tremble, and when he looked at Vera, his green eyes held the promise of destruction. "My lord," Vera stammered, dropping to her knees in a belated show of respect. "I was only trying to protect our community from the one prophesied to save both our peoples." Kieran's voice was soft, which somehow made it infinitely more threatening. "From the bridge builder whose awakening was foretold before your grandmother's grandmother drew breath? You dare to interfere with destiny itself?" Evelyn struggled to her feet, still shaking from the attempted binding, but filled with a new understanding of her own strength. The attack had been meant to cripple her, but instead it had forced her power to fully manifest in self-defense. She could feel it now, flowing through her like liquid fire, connecting her to every living thing in the forest and beyond. "The prophecy could be wrong," Vera said desperately. "The old words can be misinterpreted. Just because she has some small gifts doesn't mean some small gifts." Lady Isadora's voice carried amusement as she stepped into the clearing, and Evelyn realized that this confrontation had been orchestrated as carefully as her original rejection. "Child, show them what you truly are." Evelyn looked around the circle, at Marcus standing in stunned silence, at Vera kneeling in defeat, at the two supernatural beings who had guided her to this moment. Something inside her settled into place, like a key finally turning in a lock she hadn't known existed. She raised her hands, and the forest responded. Flowers bloomed instantly on every tree despite the late season. their perfume filling the air with impossible sweetness. The standing stones sang with harmonious tones that spoke of ancient magics awakening after long slumber. Most remarkably, a bridge of pure light began to form in the air above them, connecting the mortal realm to something beyond, a shimmering pathway that led to glimpses of silver cities and ethereal courts. "Behold the bridge builder," Lady Isadora announced, her voice carrying the authority of prophecy fulfilled. "The one who will unite our worlds in ways not seen since the first days of creation." But even as Evelyn reveled in the full manifestation of her power, she found her eyes drawn to Marcus. He was staring at her with an expression of wonder and regret so profound it took her breath away. "I was wrong," he said, his voice cutting through all the supernatural magnificence surrounding them to reach something purely human in her heart. "I was a coward and a fool, and I let fear make me hurt the most extraordinary person I've ever known." "Marcus," she began, but he held up a hand. "Let me finish, please." He stepped closer, heedless of the power still crackling in the air around her. "Vera was right about one thing. You are dangerous, but not in the way she meant. You're dangerous to small minds and smaller hearts. You're dangerous to people who would rather stay safe and limited than risk everything for something greater." Tears were streaming down his face now, and Evelyn felt her own eyes burning with sympathetic moisture. "I chose safety over love," he continued. "I chose fear over faith, and I will regret that choice every day for the rest of my life. Not because of what you've become, but because of what you've always been. The bravest, kindest, most luminous person I've ever had the privilege to know." The bridge of light above them pulsed in response to the raw emotion in his words, and Evelyn realized that her greatest power was not in the magic flowing through her veins, but in her capacity to love and forgive despite the wounds inflicted upon her. "I can't go back," she said softly. "Even if I wanted to, I can't return to being the woman I was before all of this began." "I know," Marcus replied, "and I wouldn't ask you to. You were meant for something greater than anything I could have offered you. I needed you to know that losing you was the biggest mistake of my life." Lord Kieran cleared his throat, reminding them all that larger matters were at stake. "The bridge is stable," he observed, studying the pathway of light with professional interest. "You have successfully opened a permanent connection between our realms. The courts will be very interested in meeting their new diplomat." Evelyn looked up at the impossible beauty of the bridge she had created, then back at the people gathered in the sacred grove. Her old life as a carpenter's daughter was ending, but something infinitely more complex and wondrous was beginning. "What happens now?" she asked. Lady Isadora smiled, and in that expression Evelyn saw welcome and pride, and the promise of adventures yet to come. "Now you begin your real education. You will learn to walk between worlds, to speak the languages of both mortal hearts and immortal courts. You will discover powers within yourself that you cannot yet imagine, and you will face challenges that will test every aspect of your character." "And will I face them alone?" The question was directed at all of them, but her eyes found Lord Kieran's as she spoke. His smile was softer than she had ever seen it, and for a moment the ancient loneliness she had sensed in him seemed to ease. "No, bridge builder, you will never be alone again." As the sun set through the canopy above them, painting the grove in shades of gold and amber, Evelyn felt the last of her old fears fall away. She had been rejected, betrayed, attacked, and tested, and she had emerged from each trial stronger and more certain of her purpose. The woman who had wept in this circle weeks ago was gone, replaced by someone who could command the elements and bridge impossible gaps between worlds. But at her core, she was still Evelyn. Still the person who felt deeply, loved fiercely, and refused to let pain destroy her capacity for compassion. Marcus approached her one last time, stopping just close enough that she could see the sincerity shining in his familiar eyes. "I know I have no right to ask this," he said quietly, "but will you forgive me? Not for my sake, but for yours. Don't let my mistakes poison the extraordinary future waiting for you." Evelyn considered the request, feeling the weight of old hurt warring with her natural inclination toward mercy. In the end, it was no contest. Forgiveness was not something she granted for others, but something she chose for herself. "I forgive you," she said simply, and watched as relief flooded his features. "But Marcus, this is goodbye. I'm not the same person you fell in love with, and I never will be again." He nodded, understanding and acceptance clear in his expression. "I know, but whoever you become, wherever this path leads you, know that you will always have my respect and my love, even if I lost the right to call it that." As he turned to leave the grove, Evelyn felt the final chapter of her old life closing. But instead of sadness, she felt only anticipation for whatever came next. Councilwoman Vera was led away by Lady Isadora, her schemes unraveled and her influence broken. The older woman's parting words carried the weight of grudging respect. "You may have won this battle, child, but power like yours will bring its own challenges. I hope you prove strong enough to bear them." When they were finally alone in the grove, Lord Kieran moved to stand beside Evelyn as she gazed up at the bridge of light, still shimmering overhead. "Ready for your first journey between worlds?" he asked, extending his hand in invitation. Evelyn looked back once at the path that would take her home to her parents' cottage, to the simple life she was leaving behind. Then she turned toward the impossible bridge of her own creation and the magnificent, terrifying future it represented. "I'm ready," she said, placing her hand in his. Together, they stepped onto the bridge of light and disappeared into the realm beyond, leaving behind the mortal world and stepping into a destiny that would reshape both realms forever. Behind them, the sacred grove fell quiet, but the standing stones continued to hum with residual power, a testament to the night when prophecy became reality and a heartbroken carpenter's daughter discovered she was meant to be so much more. The forest itself seemed to sigh with satisfaction, as if it had been holding its breath for 18 years, waiting for this moment when balance would finally be restored and two worlds would be united by the courage of one extraordinary woman who had learned that her greatest strength lay not in the power flowing through her veins, but in her refusal to let pain diminish her capacity for love.